Well, I'm super excited to have Jay Olshonsky, president of NAI Global. NAI is a network of independently owned and operated firms all across the world. I'm a partner at one of those firms, and I'm proud to have been at NAI for over 15 years now. So you can see why I'm super excited to have Jay on the call. So welcome, Jay.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to be here too. It's the first time you and I have done something like this. So, I think this would be great, and we can talk about the commercial real estate business, talk about the pandemic, talk about the future, and I'm looking forward to it too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks again for coming on. There's a lot to cover, and I know you've been in the business since 1982, so you've seen a lot of things in those years, I'm sure. At a high level, how has the commercial real estate industry evolved over that time?
Wow, well, that's a long time. So let's rewind a little bit. It's evolved a lot. Mainly, the biggest evolution I would say is the invention of technology that really evolved over that time period. When I first was out of college and got into commercial real estate, there were no cell phones. There were barely fax machines, barely ATMs, if you can imagine that. And there was very limited word processing. We were still using what I'd call electronic typewriters back then. So when you think of the evolution over, let's say, almost 3.5 decades now, it's been enormous. And then how people use commercial real estate, and it's all forms of commercial real estate. It's office, it's industrial, it's retail. I can even say it's even how we use multifamily or even single family homes now that are considered an institutional real estate investment grade sort of thing. How land is used, certainly things like that. And it's kind of, I think the biggest change that the technology allowed is it unbridled people to have to, be in one place, or, certainly in the last 10 years with the mobile technology, you really have had changes to commercial real estate. But again, let's back up. At core, someone needs a place to live. They need a place to shop. They need a place to work. So depending on the type of commercial real estate that's housing that, whether it was in 1982 or in 2021, there are still places where people go to do all of those functions. If you think about it, I live in an apartment building that is considered commercial real estate because it's owned by one of the largest apartment building owners in the world. And then there are other people, and I have 2 offices that I haven't gone to recently, but I still have 2 offices within New York City and Princeton, New Jersey. I still go across the street to the grocery store. Now, the grocery store wasn't the Whole Foods owned by Amazon back in 1982. It was more of a local thing, but it's still, the same. I still go to the drugstore on occasion, even though I did order some things online today. It's still the basic function of these things. And then if you think about like the auto industry or just heavy industry, you still have to have an industrial or manufacturing building to make things, and people then go to work there. You can't. The one thing the internet hasn't done yet, and maybe it will, certainly with 3D printing and things like that, you still have to have commercial real estate facilities to, manufacture, to house. And certainly it's evolved. But I would say the number one change that I've seen in the 3.5 decades is how technology has affected all of commercial real estate, and an enormous acceleration of mobile technology. And I'd say the iPhone, I think, is 13, 14 years old now. In the last 13, 14 years, as the whole world has switched to, let's say, mobile technology, which is by far probably going to be the biggest change that all commercial real estate sees.
Yeah, and I could talk to that as well because I got into the business in 2005, and at the time, even just talking about technology, fax machines were how we sent a lot of our information. And I can't even recall the last time that I've got a fax because everything is moved over to mobile or scanning and sending. And I think that's proliferated throughout not just brokerage, which you and I are in, but in how all these businesses are doing things as well. So I've noticed a big transition just even in 15 years to that more digital world. And then I think we're seeing that with the huge uptick in e-commerce. Even though e-commerce has been around for a while, the technology has got to the level where you can actually do things so much more efficiently and quickly now. That movement away from buying things in store and taking it home has really transitioned to that order online and have delivered. So I kind of want to explore all those asset classes with you
Sure.
because I know that you've got exposure to the entire global commercial real estate market. So I think you've got a very unique perspective on how this is all unfolding. So I do want to get your thoughts on the office, retail, and industrial market, and maybe we'll start with office because, like you said, you're in the New York area. That the struggles of the office market have been very well documented over the last year or so with COVID. So what's your take on what's happening in the office market? Do you see people continuing to work from home once immunization takes hold? And a kind of two-part question, if not, when do you see people coming back to the office?
Well, that's an interesting question that kind of makes an interesting answer. And I'll start with, I've lived long enough to see things in commercial real estate that I don't want to say that we will never be back to full office work like we were, let's say, pre-pandemic or pre, March of last year. We've seen so many things change after, dire predictions. It'll never be the same. And then 2 to 3 or 4 years later, guess what? It's 100% the same, and people get back to it. Now, there's a lot of people that are saying in office space, what's the need for the office space if people can be productive and work from, let's say, home or remotely? In a certain regard, the pandemic fully accelerated that trend. That trend was already there. I mean, even our organization, our corporate headquarters of NAI Global, we all had the ability to operate virtually, work from wherever we had an internet connection or a cell phone connection, mainly due to we traveled all the time visiting, our good members like yourselves and others, seeing people at events, meeting with customers, owners and users of real estate. So in a certain regard, we were kind of doing that prior to the pandemic hitting. And then obviously once the pandemic hit and then you had restrictions on, you couldn't even go to offices in a lot of jurisdictions, everyone kind of moved to their home or moved to wherever their remote workplace. So depending on whom you ask, right now, New York City's trending in the 10 to 20% occupancy of the 400 million square feet of office space they have in New York. Now, keep in mind, that's done by a company called Castle Security Systems, and they actually track the card swipes when you go into your office, your security cards. And so at some level, I think it's been hovering about 13, 14%. So that has a major effect on office space. So then if you multiply that out to Chicago, San Francisco, in the big area, and then you multiply that out to other large urban areas, it's not that much higher. One of the things you do see is where you have a driving mentality or a driving market where, let's say, more suburban office, where you can get in your car, leave your house or apartment, drive to your office building, park your car, get out of your car, go up to your office. You're seeing higher occupancies. Why is that? Well, most people feel pretty safe in their home or their car, or they feel pretty safe in their office environment, because most office environments, if they're open, and most are open now, even our offices in New York are open. We don't require people to go to them, but they're open if people want to go in. We've taken all the precautions, and so have other companies. We have the social distancing desk. We have the plastic separators. We have all the cleaning supplies. We don't allow more than, I think, 25 or 40% of the people to be there at any time. But so people are slowly moving back to, and keep in mind, there's another huge effect that all of us go through, and especially in the urban areas. I've been into our office 7 or 8 times over the last 10, 11 months. In a certain regard, I've had one face-to-face client meeting, which we did social distancing, where we could all drive to best way to describe it is like driving to a Starbucks and having a cup of coffee from 6 feet from each other. But that's really it. So right now, people don't want to meet and don't want to get together because of the safety. But I can tell you, everybody I talk to wants to be able to go back to the office, to meet with people, to go to conventions, to go meet with clients when it's safe. That's the big question. When will it be safe? So office space is going to linger. Then you get to, this is where it gets to the economics of office space. Certainly the sublet market is saturated everywhere, because if you have space you're not using, you're going to put it on the market. Now that's really tough, because you, along with everyone else, are putting space on the market, and there's really no takers. So use our small example. I mean, we have a lease that's coming up in August of this year in our New York City office, and we have been paying our rent, but we're not occupying the space. We're not trying to sublet it because of the short-term nature we have left. But we have had conversations about, where should we have offices? Should we have a large meeting room, which is a touchdown space, versus a dedicated desk or dedicated office for each individual? Now, if you didn't multiply that times, whether it's McKinsey or whether it's Deloitte or whether it's some of these big firms that are doing studies of this, you've had major corporations doing the same thing. You've had Salesforce just last week saying, we're not going to necessarily require anyone to come back to the office. And that's 67,000 people. So at some point, they're going to be taking less space. They're going to be taking, or subletting more space. And then if you just keep multiplying that, the office market is going to be really tough in the next, I'd say 2 to 4 years, depending on location. Plus, if you need space because your lease is coming up, it's going to be a very good time to either renew at a lower amount, or to do a blend and extend, where you extend your lease at a lower amount, or relocate, because maybe you're in 10,000 feet, you need 5,000 feet, and there'll be plenty of 5,000 foot chunks. So there's going to be some pain in the office market from the ownership point of view, because it's going to be tougher to lease space. Also, the other thing, got to mention this, all the leases are shorter. Nobody's taking 10-year leases unless they have to, because of improvements or because it's critical nature of the facility. So, and we all know that the leases are shorter, so the values of buildings become less. And even in our business, if you have a 3-year lease versus a 10-year lease, you have a commission and services and fees that are paid at 30% versus, let's say, 100%. So you're even starting to see rumblings there. And that's evidenced in all the public companies in the commercial real estate space that, are some of our good competitors. Their leasing is off anywhere from 50 to 70% in activity. So office is, I'm a little worried about office. I think that's sort of a quiet one that is not talked about a lot.
Yeah, you bring us some really good points on there. I keep going back to a report that KPMG put out in the fall, where they surveyed a number of CEOs, and it came back that 69% of the CEOs they surveyed expect to downsize office space. And a lot of those leases, like you mentioned, they've got trailing lease obligations. So they can't just give back the space in the middle of the pandemic. They've got to let their leases ride out. So if they've got anywhere from, call it, 2 to 5 years left on their lease, we might not see this really unfold for several years yet. But the one thing that is encouraging for me is they just expect to downsize. The very few companies are saying that they're just giving up office space altogether. Correct. For all the really good reasons that you mentioned. Myself personally, I really like being around other people in that collaborative environment and getting to brainstorm ideas in person. As good as this technology is, it doesn't take it doesn't substitute for actually in-person meetings. It's a good solution for the situation right now, but I would love to get back to the office. So I agree with you. I think we do have some pain in that market, but hopefully landlords are resilient and maybe there's some adaptive reuse or repositioning of these buildings. But yeah, I do think that there's some storm clouds in the horizon on office.
Well, let me just also tell you about a story that I heard out in New York recently. There was a company in New York City where the founder of the company said, look, I really think all of my employees should come back to the office. And they've been going back to the office over the last, I don't know, 2-3 months, and they can only do like 25-30%. And they, have had a couple times where, someone comes down with the virus and then everyone has to quarantine and test. And then that's happened about 3-4 times over the last 2-3 months. And then recently I heard that not only the head person, but then 5 of the head person's employees actually got COVID. And the only common denominator to how they got COVID was going to the office. All of them were driving or taking, good, secure transportation to the office. So, and they were leaving their homes. So, we're still, at least in New York, and certainly if you read about LA and San Francisco and some other places, certainly, there's some dense areas that are still not COVID free, even though the vaccines are rolling out, which is wonderful. And I think and our numbers are going down, which is wonderful. So, we're still not out of the woods. And then, we're all hoping that, by mid-year, hopefully we'll have robust vaccines and the numbers will continue to decline. And, maybe we'll be off to the races and it'll just be a few pockets that pop up. But it's very location dependent, office, and who's going back into the office, because, it might be perfectly fine in your neck of the woods, but then somewhere else it's, in a suburban area, it's just not. And that's so hard to predict, at least for the near term.
So I guess if we're hoping that immunization does bring a percentage of office employees back, I think there's still an optimism that office will rebound at some point in the next 6 to 12 months. But I think switching gears to retail has been under pressure for decades now with e-commerce and the so-called retail apocalypse, which has been impending for years now. This has certainly put an even deeper wedge into traditional bricks and mortars retailers, because now people's habits have really shifted to e-commerce even more. So where do you see risks and opportunities in the retail market right now?
Well, you kind of hit on it. Retail was kind of limping along. Not all retail, but a lot of retail was limping along prior to COVID in last year. So as someone once said to me, there's good retail and there's not good retail. And it's really just that simple. There are some retail that's still doing extremely well and will continue to do extremely well, brick and mortar retail. But it depends what it is. I mean, the Home Depots, the Lowe's, of the world that are still selling things like that, or, grocery stores that are still, drugstores. You have a lot of retail that's extremely, it was good before, it's even better now because people are actually using it. Now, e-commerce, which, certainly was there prior to COVID, when you send everybody home and you basically tell them, don't go to the store, don't go to the restaurant, don't go to the movies, or not even don't go, you can't go. The only other option is for people to order online or order their groceries, their supplies, their paper towels, whatever it is, their televisions. And so we saw a major acceleration of what I'd call shift from brick and mortar retailer to online, because it's like, why do I need to go to Whole Foods if Whole Foods will deliver in 2 hours? Why do I need to go to Rite Aid or Walgreens if they'll deliver within 2 hours? Especially in New York City, I'm talking might be a little bit faster or slower in other places. So you've got a switch that got totally accelerated. And then the bigger thing that you have to remember, one of the number one growths of retail that's been in the last 5 or 10 years has been what we would call entertainment retail, the movie theaters, the restaurants, even the amusement parks, the health clubs, all those things that are in those kind of spaces that essentially just shut down and haven't really opened back up. So, retail kind of got hit with a double whammy. You had the aspect that some retail was bad to begin with. There were bad malls already. And then all of a sudden, all of those different entertainment, lifestyle, restaurant type, things shut down. So whatever was on the edge of being bad real estate is now bad real estate. And even good real estate, if it had a high percentage of let's say, Home Depot type places or grocery stores, that got hit pretty hard too. Even fast food, has gotten hit pretty hard depending on where it is. Not everyone's able to switch. So retail's got some growing pains. You're going to see adaptive reuse of retail. I was on a call yesterday about some malls that are basically vacant. And I hate to say this, but someone said, well, what do you think it's worth? And I said, it's a land play. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, it's a land play. The structure of the retail that's on there now is not going to work for industrial, and it can't be used as retail because it's not going to work. So essentially it's a rezoning and it's a land play. You're going to have to knock it down and rebuild. Now that, if it's a land play, you're talking about buildings that maybe were worth, $100, $150 a foot that are going to go down to, I don't know, 8 or 10 or something like that, depending on what you can build on it. So there's a lot of issues. And in retail, you got to remember, is everywhere. Every town has good retail and every town has, I'm sure in your hometown, you can tell me that's a good center, that's a terrible center. And so it's an ongoing problem. It's a big problem. Maybe not as bad as hotel, but it certainly is. It's going to be one of the biggest problems going forward.
I really like that point you made about good retail and bad retail.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a number of companies that have echoed that same comment. I just talked to a hot tub store the other day, and they said that in 25 years they've been in business, last year was their best year ever. In the middle of a pandemic, everyone wanted to get a hot tub because they weren't going to be traveling. So there are some retailers that are actually doing way better than they expected, and then there's some that are struggling. So that will be an interesting trend to see develop as we go forward on that. And I guess that segues quite neatly into the next question that I have for you, is regarding industrial. And I'm very conscious of delineating industrial into warehousing and manufacturing, because I think that they're two completely different subcategories of industrial. So I won't necessarily touch on the manufacturing right now, but the warehousing is very closely related to e-commerce. And I just interviewed Casey Conway, the chief economist of CCM Institute, and he was talking about Prologis, about how they have plans to build 200 million square feet of logistics space in the near future here. And that's just a mind-boggling stat, that even with the ramp up of development that we've already seen in the last few years, that these big companies are planning on adding even more. So is that a trend that you see continuing going forward? Is it just like the big major companies like Prologis that are doing it, or are other ones doing it in more local markets as well?
Well, keep in mind, Prologis is a global company. So yes, 200 million sounds like a huge number, but keep in mind they're by far the largest industrial owner in Europe and logistics owner in Europe and the United States. So and I thought I read recently they have like 500 or 600 million feet, something like that. So it is a big number, but it's not, when you put it in context of what they already have, it's not astronomical, but it's a big number. Don't get me wrong. Well, two things. Industrial does have to be kind of broken down into logistics and what I call the Amazon effect of industrial versus manufacturing versus, let's call it what some of the other aspects of industrial, like just storage. For a long, long time, you would have like people that, would store things in industrial warehouse buildings, or you would have the heating and cooling contractor that, ran his business out of a industrial building with a little bit of office in front. So the biggest trend is certainly in the last mile and the logistics and the larger warehousing. But there is something else going on too that has to do with trucking. So in a certain regard, there's a lot of different rules that have been put into trucking. So you're not going to have people driving the trucks as much. And if you talk to most people about industrial, especially last mile industrial, it's more about labor than it is in transportation than it is about the physical industrial building. Because in a certain regard, you're moving goods and services, whether you're moving them inside the building, which certainly automation can do, but you still have to have people. I mean, if you've ever been to an Amazon facility, there's a lot of people that are inside the facility before it even gets onto the truck that goes out to, deliver the stuff, or even as it comes into the warehouse going that. So I do believe that will continue, because keep in mind what happened. We had the ramp up of the pandemic really accelerating the e-commerce aspect of all companies, whether it's Amazon, Target, Walmart, and you can into 3PLs, you can keep going. I could list probably 25 different retailers that are now heavy in logistics. And so they have an ongoing need to move these goods and services. And as we all know, you can't do that in a 16-foot clear, traditional old, warehouse building that's maybe only 100,000 feet, because it just is not efficient to get the trucks in. They might not have the truck corrals. They might not have the clear height. So you will see a continuation of doing this, and you will see a continuation of close in to urban areas, certainly being hot product type. And we're seeing that where, certainly this is going to sound kind of strange, but I bet there might even be some office locations that go dark, and certainly some retail locations that go dark that will convert into industrial, because the industrial rents right now in some areas are so high, they're actually much higher than the net rent of the office building or the retail building that could be there. Now, there's a lot of problems with that. I had a long conversation, I don't think it was with KC, but with someone else. Not everything's zoned for industrial. Not everything can handle, the 53-foot trucks from a weight point of view, or a neighborhood point of view, or a turning radius point of view, or even highway access point of view. It's not as simple. Even in New York City, there are only a couple streets that they allow, 53-foot, trucks to come down, and the rest have to be more of the service trucks. So it won't be everywhere. And then, but there's no question but land for industrial, anything close in industrial, the demand is insatiable. And then the big, huge box, the 500 to a million or $1.5 million. I mean, one of our guys down in Texas he's selling 50 or 90 acres to a big retailer, and they're going to build a 1.5 million square foot distribution center. And that's, that's also off of the intermodal that comes in from the Port of Houston and goes right to that. So you're going to see enormous amounts of industrial there. You're going to see enormous amounts of industrial around all the ports. I mean, certainly you can look at Los Angeles and say anything close to the port, essentially is already taken, and they extend it out to the Inland Empire, where essentially, it's crazy what's going on there. Even in Toronto, which is probably one of the largest markets for industrial in North America. Most people don't realize that. It's not just Canada, but even Toronto is the fourth largest metropolitan area in North America. You're seeing this in border towns, where you're seeing even El Paso, Texas, where you'll have maybe a Chinese manufacturer on the Mexican side, but then you'll have a logistics 3PL on the American side. So this will continue, and it's all due to our insatiable appetite to order stuff and to order stuff online. Now, I talked to somebody recently in the metropolitan New York area, and I said, well, is this a bubble? I mean, when's this going to stop? I mean, Amazon and all these guys can't gobble everything. And he said, they might be able to gobble everything for the next 12 months. But he knows of 2 Amazon leases where they have taken, 200,000-300,000 square foot close-in buildings. They've never occupied them. They've actually so you can at some point say, maybe this will end. I just don't know when. that's going to end. So, certainly it's a very, very good time to be an industrial owner, industrial broker, and that will continue. I think it's a tough time if you're like, the plumber that needs to find 10,000 square feet in your local market, because if it's a market where these logistics guys are in, your prices maybe have doubled for your renewal or things like that. So there are some, other sides to it that also will have some negative consequences. I think some hotels will be knocked down potentially, especially around airports, that could become industrial. You're going to also see multi-story industrial. You're seeing that already. You're seeing that in Seattle. You're seeing that wherever land's tight, you're going to start seeing that. I think in Florida, they're starting to plan some multi-floor industrial, where they have the trucks drive up to a different level. And that's mainly due to density and just availability of land.
So this leads to my next question, and I really enjoyed those points that you made. But I think people will look back on COVID here as a catalyst for significant change that will probably cause ripples that we won't even see for several years. But in my lifetime, there hasn't been a single event that's going to have as much of an impact as we talked about on the office, retail, and industrial markets. So I think keeping on top of all these trends is going to be imperative for people. But where do you go? Where are you recommending people go to stay on top of all these trends that are ebbing and flowing so quickly? How do people stay on top of all this?
Well, I can tell you what I do, and one of the things is that I tend to read. I'm going to say, 2-3 hours a day in bits and pieces on different, and from multiple sources. Whether it's the traditional sources, like CoStar News or Globe Street or BizNow in the United States. But then I follow a whole bunch of what I would consider thought leaders on Twitter, and then I click through to whatever they've written, and certainly, scan lots of newspapers. I mean, the Wall Street Journal has a lot of things. The New York Times has a lot of things. Even all of the business journals I try to follow, so I get different things on that. And the other thing, one of the great things about being, NAI Global and all of our individuals being part of NAI Global, two of the most informative calls that I sit on, there's an industrial call that has about 50 of our industrial brokers across America. And I don't know if anyone is on from Canada. I think there are a couple people, but Gary sometimes is on from Mexico. And essentially that's where I just listen. I don't actually say anything on the call, but I'll hear someone say, well, Amazon's looking to take $1.5 million in the Albany area, and there's nothing available. Then I'll hear like that one I told you about down in Houston. John Simons is our broker with NAI Partners who did that deal. And he's like, Jay, I can't tell you. I mean, even though he's freezing right now, he says his phone's ringing off the hook. And because he's got this huge industrial site that he's selling land sites on. So a lot of it is also picking up bits and pieces from hearing what people are saying, in that regard. And then also the corporate services call, you can kind of hear different things because there's an industrial component of that also. That's how I keep up on a lot of things, but it's a challenge. Chad, you're 100% correct. It's not easy to keep up on everything. I probably talk to Casey Conway once a month, just pick up the phone and call him, and I try to talk to other, either economists or thought leaders in this space. And as we try to bring people to our different meetings and now that they're virtual and stuff like that. We have a leadership conference coming up in 2-3 weeks. And, we have a person out of England that's going to talk. He's a thought leader on where things are going. And we've had other thought leaders. So a lot of it's that we actually pay people to give us thought leader information and then, follow that. But it's a challenge. I mean, it's moving so quickly, that it's hard to keep up. Another thing to do is a lot of our good competitors are publicly traded companies like CBRE, Jones Lang LaSalle, Cushman & Wakefield, and others. And since they're public companies, they report everything. So, like Newmark just reported earnings yesterday or the day before yesterday. So at some point in the next week, I'll actually read their report. because they're bits and pieces. Because the one thing I read out of it already is that their leasing was in the toilet, but their mortgage banking is off the charts. So people are placing loans and stuff like that, and their investment sales was still good last year. Because if it wasn't good, it would have been a wipeout, for them. So things like that are another good spot to just pick up information.
Yeah, commercial real estate's a unique industry in the regard that you can't just come out of college and expect that you know everything. If anything, you come out of college, you actually have to continue learning every single day.
Oh, look, as you outlined, I've been doing this 38 years, and I feel I know more now because of the availability of information than ever. Keep in mind, when I first started in the business, the only way you got a lease comp or market information was to call 20 people and actually physically get that information. Today you can kind of get all that information. We have a national CoStar account. So, if we truly want information on a market or something like that, I can always call you and you'll, tell me what's going on in your neck of the woods, which is a great way to get information. But we also, can go on to, to some of the good services that we subscribe to, whether it's CoStar or TREP or Real Capital Analytics. And you can get some really good information. But again, you got to allocate the time to read it. And, that's the hard part. And then decide, there's a lot of noise out there too. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of stuff you read and you're not quite sure why it was even written.
So I want to talk more on the NAI conferences, because
Sure.
I've been to a number of them over the years. Last year, like every other organization, they had to be moved to virtual. Kudos to you and the team at NAI. I thought you did an excellent job of hosting the one in the fall. I'm sure that was a disruption to the normal one that you had planned in New Orleans, but I thought you guys pulled it off excellently. What do you have in store for this fall? Are you still hoping to be able to do the one in New Orleans?
We are. It's scheduled for the last week of September, and if I had to place a bet, I think it's 60% it won't happen, 40% it will, and that has nothing to do with you or me or anybody else. It's just the unknown of how many people will be vaccinated, and the unknown of flare-ups. Because New Orleans is kind of closed right now. I mean, there's no real, people going to New Orleans for any meetings, and it's kind of like a little bit of a small Vegas. It's like a conference, sort of town and tourism town. The hotel is open, but only open to if people want to sleep there. There's no facilities. So it's really hard to say sitting, February 18th, what will happen, call it the end of September. I want to be optimistic. And, lots of times I say it's 50-50, but we are fully planning on that to be a go or go virtual at this time. We believe if we can safely do it, and that you got to understand, it's not the money, it's not the location, we believe if you come and then 700 of your friends in NAI come, including myself and my team, the reverse of us all getting sick is a devastating business decision. I mean, just think about, the aspect of we bring 700 people together and we're not right, and something health-wise goes wrong, and you have 200 people sick. That's a real, people always go, oh, I'd like to go and all that, and I'll take my chances. Like, well, no. It doesn't work that way. If 200 of our people have to go down keep in mind, we'll all have to quarantine if that happens. Mm-hmm. And so you're essentially putting 600-700 people on the sidelines for 2 to 3 weeks. And that's the biggest health decision that needs to be made, because, that's the part you can't put a dollar amount on. You can put a dollar amount on how much food you're going to buy, what the hotel costs, what the airplane costs, but you can't put a dollar amount on how much lost business there'll be if you're sick or if I'm sick, and God forbid if someone's really sick, and it certainly goes that way. So we're being optimistic. Look, I think it'll become clearer, hopefully, in the late spring this, early summer, but we have nothing planned physically in between now and then. The only thing we have planned, but we haven't planned it, we've actually just line itemed it, is we have something that we call regionalized drive-to meetings. So the best example I would give you is, let's take the New York, the East Coast of the United States. If it's safe, maybe we pick a place in between Boston and Washington, D.C., like New Jersey. So everyone, if they wanted to, could get in their car at 6 o'clock in the morning, drive 2 to 4 hours, which is, and it's not ideal, but drive 2 to 4 hours, have an outdoor covered meeting in the warm time period from 10 to maybe 2, and have some lunch or something like that, have some events, maybe pipe in one event from different places, and then everyone could get back in their car and within 2 to 4 hours, hopefully be home, back in their bed. So we're planning that, but we haven't planned it yet because we still don't think it's safe enough to do it anywhere. And if you think about like Los Angeles, so if we did it in the Palm Desert or Palm Springs, you could draw from Los Angeles, Phoenix, Tucson, Vegas, San Diego. So you could get all those members together, from that point of view. Or if you kind of go even Seattle, Vancouver, Portland, it's harder in the West. Obviously, it's much harder in the West because of the distance. But we've been thinking about those sort of things. But everything else we're doing is virtual. We'll do a virtual global market outlook in May or June. We'll do a virtual women's conference, in May. We're going to do a virtual PDM mastermind in NAI University in May. We're going to do the virtual leadership, in March, and then we'll have to keep coming up with things. We also know that there are no industry events in between now and the fall. Most of them are in the fall. So it'll be also, we always attend all the industry events because a lot of us are CCIMs, SIORs, RICSs, and we attend those events, but none of those are planned until the fall either. So if those happen and they're safe to go to, I'm sure we'll have people at those. And then we can also structure different sort of get-togethers and networking around those events too. So we're being optimistic, but it's just, there was an article in the New York Times today that, people are real concerned about, will business travel ever come back to the form it was? Now it will. It's just a question of how long will it take? And it's tough. It's very hard. And also keeping content. People like meeting with each other. They like doing business with people they know. As much as Zoom and other things is great, it's not the same. It's just not the same. Now, I do think, look, I'm not going to necessarily get on a plane to go to, let's say, fly 10 hours if I can do a Zoom call and the customer wants to do a Zoom call, because, there's an efficiency aspect that we've proven we can do with Zoom. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on.
Yeah, like you, I share that same optimism. I hope that the SIOR conference goes in the fall. I hope the New Orleans goes for NAI in the fall. But I think the encouraging part about this is that the NAI, SIOR, and other organizations have done an awesome job of putting together a virtual platform. So
Yeah.
as a substitute, I think everybody does want to get back to the in-person conferences, but until it's safe to do so, like you're saying, you guys have put together a really good platform for it. So I'd commend you and others for that job you've done.
Thank you.
One
Sure.
last question I just want to finish on, and it's a question I always like asking successful brokers that have been in the business for a long time. What do you see in broker? What makes a good broker? And I guess the corollary to that is what can make a bad broker? What are some of the traits that make a broker good at what they do?
Well, let's start with what I would say. One of the common denominators I see in what makes a bad broker, and this happened yesterday. I was on a call with one of my colleagues at NAI and then another colleague, and they were just being lazy. I mean, they were asking questions, to me and to my other colleague here at NAI, that we got on the phone afterwards and said, why are they asking those questions? This is like readily available information if they just want to do a little work. So the most common denominator I find in what I call bad brokerage is lack of communication and lack of effort. And I'll start with lack of communication. I mean, lots of times, people always say, why did you lose a listing or lose a deal or lose an opportunity? It has to do with you didn't communicate with either the owner or the occupier that you're doing business with, even if the communication had to be negative. And like we got a situation right now where someone thought we were going to get like 10 bids at like $40 million, but the market's saying, we're getting like 3 bids at 17 million. The news is bad, but the point of the matter is, here's the process we went through to get to those 7 bids, and here's what the pricing. That doesn't mean we shouldn't, and it's not to say it's anyone's fault. It's just to, that's the reality of the situation. It's not what the owner wants to hear. But the point of the matter is, so the owner now needs to make a decision. They need to decide, do I keep my property, which is, by the way, vacant and not income producing, or do I accept the $17 million? And I can make an argument that I don't think it's ever going to be worth 40 million. But, and then the question comes in, how long are you going to have to hold it to make it worth 40 million? So sometimes those are the two things I find that are the bad side of brokerage, that people don't want to give bad news and they don't want to put in the time or put in the effort that it takes. The reverse to this, and what makes a good broker, is someone that has an unbelievable desire to just succeed and please their customer. In a certain regard, when I think of the best brokers I know, most of the truly best brokers I've ever met are workaholics. I mean, in some form or another, they don't work, 9 to 5. They don't work 8 to 4. They work whenever there's work. And generally they work all the time. And they always are trying to figure out ways to do more work. There's no such thing as weekends. Weekends, their weekend activities with their families involve their customers and clients. That's what makes a good broker. Their religious or church or different aspects, everyone knows that they're the best real estate broker in town at church or synagogue or wherever they're spending their time. Everyone on the Little League field with their children knows that, Chad's the real estate broker. And they're not out there like with signs, holding up signs, telling everyone this, but there's everyone knows, the best real estate broker, or one of the best in every town. They also really focus on market share, and they also specialize. Very few brokers are jack of all trades that are really, really good. Like I have a role that gives me a broad view. But even when I was a broker, I was a landlord office broker, and I didn't do buildings less than 100,000 square feet, period, the end. If I had a building to sell, I brought in my team of investment sale experts. If I had a tenant rep assignment, I gave it to a tenant rep broker and took a referral. So if there was retail, I gave it to the retail team. If it's multifamily, I'd take a referral, but I would give it and forget about it. The really good brokers are very specialized and very narrow. So they're known as the law firm tenant rep broker in an area. They're not known as a tenant rep broker. They're known as, well, he controls most of the landlord and office space in the area on the landlord side, but he doesn't really do tenant rep, or she. So that's what makes up good brokers. And then they also, when I think about people that I've met, they just work a lot, and they're all over social media, and you don't even know it because they're not following you. They're following their customers, and they're marketing not to other brokers because they consider other brokers competitors. There's a guy at I spent 15 years at CBRE before I came here, and there's a guy in New York City with CBRE. I won't mention his name, who's the best law firm broker in the world, and no one knows who he is. And he likes it just that way. But if you talk to 25 managing partners at law firms and you mention his name, they go, oh, yeah, we know. So it's very narrow specialization. Or, I remember a broker I worked with that sold multifamily, and literally I was in a dinner with him once, and because I managed him, and someone said, well, I've got an industrial portfolio to sell and it's about 150 million. He said, no problem, I'm going to have Jack call you. That was it. And Jack wasn't on his team. He didn't even take a referral. He basically just said, that's not what I do, but Jack does. So again, you have to, when I look at this, if you think about it, think about like in a sports analogy. There's no question that Tom Brady is a pretty good quarterback, right? We'd all agree with that. Yeah. I think he would suck as a tight end. And I think he'd suck as a middle. So it's almost like he knows his role and he sticks to it. And I find that's another big mistake real estate brokers make. They try to be everything to everybody. And they actually would make more money if they just referred to an expert and took 10 or 15 or 20%. The most money I've ever made on certain deals is essentially where I've just referred things to people, because if you refer 5 things to people at 20%, you're now at 120% or 100%. Mm-hmm. So, and you're not spending any time doing it. It's the whole sort of Wall Street concept of make money while you're sleeping. That's what I find really, really, really good brokers do. And one trick that I use, and I still do it to this day, because sometimes we send business, always overpay on a referral. Meaning that if I truly control the client, but they need space in your market, well, normally if I would normally give you, like 50-50, if we're going to split the deal, I'd give you 70-30, because I want you to go, wow, he didn't need to do that. And you always find when you do things like that, it's sort of like, if you go to the same restaurant all the time, believe me, they know who tips a little bit better than the next guy. So things like those are a couple of suggestions.
I really love that point, because it's counterintuitive for a broker to think I've got to give away money so that I can get more money. But
absolutely,
I've noticed that in my career as well, is that you actually win in the long run for making those short-term sacrifices.
Right. And the other thing is, and I was taught this by a woman broker that I worked with about 15, 20 years ago. She brought me a very, very, very big deal. It was like $1 million commission. And she said, hey, I need your help on this deal. And I said, well, what kind of help do you need? And she said, well, it's your market, but I've got control of the tenant. I said, okay. And I said, what do you want me to do? And she said, I just want you to provide local support and answer questions that I'll have and the client might have. And, so I said, okay. And so that was the initial conversation. So long story short, essentially all I had to do was push play, because candidly, all the information she needed, I knew on top of my head, because that was my cup of tea. It was my backyard. It was my market. So the deal got done and the fee was $1 million. She calls me up afterwards and she says, well, how are we going to split up the money? We never talked about how we're going to split up the money. And so I thought about it, and I actually kept track a little bit of my time. And, I said, I don't know, why don't you give me 200,000 gross? And she said, oh, well, that's not enough. And I'm like, well, to tell you the truth, I really didn't do that much. I went to some meetings. You had complete control of the tenant. In a certain regard, it's still 100. Back then I was a broker. I said, it's still 100 grand in my pocket, and she said, no, that's not enough. And I'm like, and she kept arguing, it's not enough. It's not enough. This is a reverse example of overpaying. And so I said, okay, well, what do you think's the right amount? And she said, no. And she's a good negotiator. She said, no, I'm not going to play that game. And I said, all right, well, you want to agree on, how about we agree on this deal? I said, why don't we agree on 25% and a promise? And she said, what's the promise? I said, I'm your guy anytime you need anything in this market. She said, done. Well, I made more money in the next 5 years than I did on the first deal. Wow. And it was all because, we never talked about how to share money. We never had anything in writing. We never, and I always say, brokers make the mistake of deep down, everyone knows their value. Right? Everyone knows their value. They just won't tell you. They just won't tell you. So if you really know your value at some level, just think of it long-term. I mean, if you go to accounting, real estate is a long-term investment on a balance sheet. So in a certain regard, if you're going to be in this business, and I've now been in this business a long time, and I think anyone like you have too been in the business a long time, anyone that's going to be in the business a long time, you need more friends than you need enemies. And it's just that simple.
That's a great point. So I really appreciate that story. I hope people take that to heart, because there's a lot of profound wisdom in there. I guess just to wrap up, being sensitive to your time, any closing comments that you'd have for brokers or businesses or property owners out there right now as we go and finish out the rest of 2021?
Yes. One, this too will pass. It will. So in a certain regard, don't let it get you totally down. If you're a property owner, make a very quick assessment. Are you able to survive this? Will your property survive it? And if you're on the fence about that, what do you need to do to make sure your property survives this? Do you need to, as I like to say, go ugly early? Make a deal that's a terrible deal, but you might find it'll be a great deal 6 months from now, and take a chance. Especially if you got a good tenant with credit or something like that. If you're underwater and should you put your property on the market to see what the market will bear? Because in a certain regard, there's a lot of money out there waiting to buy. And here's the problem. I don't know if they're waiting to buy at 20 cents on the dollar or 80 cents on the dollar. But if you're a property owner, it doesn't do you any good to ask me or Chad or anyone, what do I think the property is worth? Because I don't know. Until I put it out there, I don't know what people will bid. But there is a lot of money out there, for people willing to come back in. And that might be your best option. And then the other thing is, is that, if you have to negotiate and you're not in a great position, just tell the truth, be upfront. If you're an owner and you're underwater a little bit, go to your bank, go to your lender, go to your brokers, go to your tenants and say, look, here's where we are. I want to work with you, but I either can or I can't. So a lot of people right now are putting their head in the sands and going, oh, I'll just kick it down. You need to work it. Everyone needs to work. The brokers need to work it. If you're a broker right now, don't get hung up that you're only doing a 1-year renewal. Just make sure you're doing the renewal next year. Sure, you would have made more money doing a 5-year renewal. I get it. But in a certain regard, if you do 10 1-year renewals right now, and no, the money's not great, but then you've got 10 more people to talk to over the next 9 months, and 10 more people that hopefully will make it or expand with you, and then do longer term. So, it's back to the same point we talked about. What makes a good broker? Good brokers have to come up with solutions all the time and have to work it and work it hard, and really get out of your comfort zone. Refer some business that you normally wouldn't have referred. Ask everyone, how can I help you? Where are things going? Because if you're locally, you can probably help somebody, and certainly being part of NAI, you can help somebody pretty much anywhere. And this will pass. If you're new to the business, it's a great time because it's never going to get worse. In a certain regard, it can't get much worse than this.
Yeah, this is the feet to the fire kind of situation. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, if you're up for it, maybe we could continue on this conversation a year from now, and we'll
reflect
back on how crazy this year turned out to be or what unfolded. But
anytime, or even six months from now, because I think a lot's going to change. And I think in the next 6 months, you're going to see a lot of the lenders that have been, forgiving might not be as forgiving anymore, unless the owners have a plan. A lot of businesses, whether they're retail or others, are going to have struggles in the next 6 months. The other thing is, we should have mentioned this, whatever your bankruptcy laws are in your jurisdictions, you should try to understand those, because that could be a very orderly way for people to work their way out from this. And we're finding a lot of people are saying, at some level, I'm just going to file bankruptcy because that creates an orderly way for me to work through this. And the filing bankruptcy is not the stigma it used to be, especially now, with those things.
Well, yeah, if you're up for it, maybe in 6 months, just after summertime, we'll pick this conversation up again. And I really do appreciate you jumping on this call.
No problem, Chad.
I'll put a link to your Twitter bio in the description, and also just to NAI Global for people that want to check that out. And thanks.
That'd be great.
Really do appreciate you jumping on the call.
All right, Chad, have a wonderful weekend.
You as well, Jay. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.